Hey, thank you so much for joining us at our Crosspoint Church podcast. Now, if you're new to our podcast or maybe new to our church in general, we're just a bunch of messed up people who don't have it all together, running after a heavenly leader who loves us and meets us right where we are. We hope this message encourages you, builds your faith, and strengthens your confidence as you continue down this journey of what it means to know and follow Jesus. Enjoy this message.
All right, let's give it up one more time for Brad and this Crosspoint band. How about that cover? We're going to spend some time talking today about the people in our lives that seem to make a mess of us. By the way, my name's Abbie. I'm so excited to be with you today. Whether you are joining us here in the venue or online, let's give a shout out to those who are joining us from wherever you find us today online. Yeah, and as Kurt mentioned a minute ago, today we are wrapping up a series called Starting Over that's been all about how do we make sure that in these moments where we're starting over relationally, financially, academically, professionally, how do we ensure that the next time will actually be better than the last time? And throughout this series, I've been reminded of this time when I was in high school when I just gotten my license. And so I was in that window where any opportunity to drive, I was going to say yes. Remember this? And my parents needed a couple of things from the store. And so I was like, I'll go to Kroger for you. I got this. And so went to Kroger, got the things on the list, came back, and when I drove back into the neighborhood, I found my parents and my grandparents who lived across the street at the time, and several neighbors had gathered out in the middle of the road, and they were looking really perplexed. So I pulled over and was like, what's going on, guys? And they were like, we're so confused. Look at this line, this strange line that's all the way down the road. It's like all through the neighborhood, and it starts at our driveway. It was in this moment when it dawned on me that I had completely forgotten my dad's warning that he had put some trash bags of leaves and junk at the end of the driveway. And so when I backed out to head to the grocery store, somehow my car picked up one of those trash bags and I drug that thing all the way to Kroger. We followed the trail and found the bag just, making a mess everywhere. And, I tell you this because in this series, we've been spending a lot of time identifying what are the things from our past that we have been dragging around with us, maybe without even realizing it, that are making a mess of things, that are leaving marks in our lives, that are leading us to this place where we're finding ourselves caught in a pattern where this time starts to feel an awful lot like last time. And so let me pray. We're going to get into this. God, thank you for this space, for these moments. Help us to be present here, to lean in to the things that you might want to show us, to be open to the ways that you might challenge us. God, we ask that you would be the one that's in charge. Would you take the lead in these moments and in our lives? Amen. So, in case you've missed some of it, or if this is your first time here, we're so glad you're here. Let me give you a little recap of where we've been so far in this series. So far, over the last couple of weeks, we've talked about how when we're starting over, in order to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes as last time, there are 3 things that we have to do. We've talked about 2 of them already, and today we're going to dig into this third one. The first thing that we talked about a couple of weeks ago is that when you're starting over, as you look back at the past, you've got to own it. That is, you've got to own your piece of what went wrong. You've got to own what was your fault in the situation. Even in situations that seem like mostly you had nothing to do with it. Mostly it was totally on that teacher, that boss, your ex, whoever it is. And I have to tell you, this one really hit home for me. A couple of weeks ago, as Kurt was walking this out for us, I started thinking about a situation in my life where I was pretty convinced I didn't have anything that I needed to own in it. I was responsible for 0% of the blame. And, as we kind of kept going through the morning, gradually I realized, if I look back, and if I really think about what I would do differently, if I could do that whole season over again, there is something that I would do differently if I could do it again. And so I wrote that down. And when I did, it was like all of a sudden the floodgates got opened. And the list just kept growing. As the band was leading us through songs, I just kept sitting back down and adding more things to the list of what was mine to own. And later that day, I looked back on it, and here's what I realized as I did. First of all, I realized that it looked hilarious because it is really dark in this room. I don't know if you've ever tried to actually take notes, but it's hard to do. So it looked a little wild. But here's the more important thing that I realized. I realized that the process of doing that, of figuring out what was mine to own in that situation, even when it was just a little bit, was actually really empowering. It actually unlocked a way forward in that relationship that I couldn't access before. And so that's the first step. We've got to own it. Then last week we talked about the next step is rethink it. And rethink it is simply this. We always, when we're looking back on things that we regret, ask the question, what was I thinking? What was I thinking? But we never actually answer that question, right? So we said when you're looking back on those things, you actually have to stop. Stop long enough to answer the question, what were you thinking? What were the beliefs? What were the patterns of thought that led you to make that decision? Because the reality is, if you think the way that you used to think, then you're going to do the things that you used to do. And so today, we're going to wrap all of this up by looking at the third part of this process, release it. And here's what I mean by this. A couple of weeks ago, Kurt introduced us to this little pie chart. We called this the circle of blame. And this is all of the blame about why things went wrong the last time, why your semester wasn't so good, why your marriage ended the way that it did, why that job didn't work out, why you found yourself in a place where your finances have gotten to be such a mess. And we talked about owning our part, this little itty bitty slice right here. And today we're coming back to this circle of blame to talk about the rest of the pie. See, this part, this is the blame that the other person or parties really is responsible for. This is the piece of the situation that actually was their fault. They really did hurt you. They really did betray to you. They lied to you. They didn't come through. They really did break their promise. They really did have a part in why you are now facing the need to start over. And you know, in many ways, this big piece of the pie, this is our story. And here's what we like about this. When we get in a situation where people start to get on our case, here's where this piece of the pie serves us. We're like, well, let me tell you my story. Let me tell you what I've been through. And by the time that we get to the end of it, people empathize with us, right? They're like, man, if I had been through what you had been through, I would feel the same way. I'd be so angry. I'd act the way that you are acting too. And it helps us to feel a little bit better. We feel justified, right? But here's the thing that we all wish wasn't true, but I think we all know, is that even though they were to blame, you have a responsibility, and I have a responsibility to decide what we're going to do with it. What are we going to do with this piece of the pie? See, just like not owning your slice here, this small slice that is your part to own, just like not owning that enables you to smuggle your past issues into the future and sets you up for a repeat performance that you do not want. In the same way, not dealing with this part, with this large part of the pie, enables other people to smuggle their issues into your future. If you don't deal with this, you allow the people who have betrayed you, who've lied to you, who fired you unnecessarily, the people you don't even like, who you never want to see again, you're allowing them to influence your future. And who wants to do that, right? The only way for us to ensure that next time isn't like that last time, to ensure that they are not following us into the future, is for us to deal with everything that happened the last time and to release it. And so, to get us moving in this direction, I'm going to ask you a few questions. And I'll be honest, I probably wouldn't ask you these questions to your face if we were sitting one-on-one. I don't really like these questions. You're not going to like them either. They might step on your toes a little bit. If you've been around here for a while, you may have heard these questions before. You probably have. They may seem familiar, but I have a feeling that they might just land a little differently for you today than they did last time. And so here's the first one. It's this. How far into your future do you intend to carry the angst created in your past? How far into your future are you going to drag the hurt from your past? To which we typically say, well, I didn't intend to carry it this far, but here we are. Or here's another way to ask it. Here's the second question. How long do you plan to allow the people who have mistreated you to continue to influence your future? And here's the problem. And again, we've talked about this before. When we think about questions like these, the answer to these questions is, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that. I don't really plan any of it, which is what makes these such important questions for us to deal with. We don't plan these kinds of things. We just live. We just keep moving forward. And we find ourselves, when we do, dealing with all of these bad attitudes and these feelings that rise up and these fears and trust issues and anger problems. And here's what we've got to get honest about. If you don't plan to deal with the past, you are going to carry it. And so before you can start over, you've got to deal with everything that happened the last time. Here's another question for you, an easier one this time. Have you ever met someone who just really seems to have their life together? Like they're the kind of person that no matter how old you are, you're like, when I grow up, I want to be like them. And then as you get to know that person a little bit more, as you start to hear some of their story, all of a sudden they tell you this piece about their past, and you're just shook. You say to them, man, I never would have expected that you had gone through that. I never would have guessed that that's what your childhood was like. I never would have imagined that you had your world rocked like that. And if you ask some follow-up questions of people like that, in moments like that, if you ask them questions like, so how did you get past that? How did you get from there to where you are today? Do you know what you will hear almost 100% of the time from them? You're going to get some version of this. Well, I just decided. They decided. Somewhere along the way, they made up their mind that as tempting as it was to hold on to that thing from the past, to allow it to continue to define them, they decided, no, that's not going to be my story. And what some of us need to hear today is that you actually have the power to decide to leave that behind you. If we really think about it, I think most of us know this from experience. Either we've met enough people with stories like that, where we've seen the evidence in their lives, or you are one of those people. You've been through it. You've been through some serious betrayal, so you've been deeply wounded, and you've seen your way through to the other side. Once when I was in the midst of one of those seasons, I was right in the aftermath of this situation that was just completely rocking my world. I remember getting together with a couple of friends and saying to them, one thing that just is really annoying to me that I didn't expect to come up in all of this. I said, I'm so annoyed that I know if I let it, this situation is actually going to make me a better person. And right now, that just feels so unfair. I don't want to have to do the work. I just want to get to be the person that I was before they made that choice, before this happened to me. And then I started to feel a little vulnerable about how honest I was being with them. And I said, is that the dumbest thing that you've ever heard? And they paused for a minute, and then one of my friends who's one of those people, who's been through it before, she looked me in the eye and she said, no, actually that makes a lot of sense. If that's where you are today, I just want to stop for a minute and say, first of all, I get it. If you're walking in here with some fresh pain, with some things that have just left you reeling, if no one has said this to you yet, I just want to be the first to say, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for the things that you've had to endure. I'm so sorry for the ways that you've been wronged. And maybe for you, today is just about claiming at some point, you will have the ability to decide what you want to do about it, even if you aren't quite ready for that yet. But for others of us, for some of us today, it's time. It's time to take a step to release the past so that the past can release you. And all of this whole conversation boils down to this one very important word, this one very important concept that's not a surprise to any of us. It's something that's familiar to every one of us. It's a word that we all know: forgive. Forgive. Maybe you have a love-hate relationship to this word. Sometimes I think we can be resistant to the idea of forgiveness because somewhere along the way we've picked up a skewed understanding of what forgiveness actually is. And so before we go any further, I just want to be clear that forgiveness is not a free ticket for the people who have hurt you in the past to continue to hurt you in the future. This is not a permission for the person who has abused you to continue to abuse you. Forgiveness does not mean that you don't put boundaries in place so that next time can be different. Forgiveness is also not a magic wand. Forgiveness is not this magic thing that all of a sudden in one moment just fixes it all. It doesn't mean that there isn't going to be more work to do. Forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean reconciliation. Sometimes it's part of that process, and sometimes they're different things. And the third thing I want to make sure that we're on the same page about is that forgiveness is not dependent on how you feel. I think this is a big one that trips us up so often. We think things like this: you know what, I'll forgive them when I don't feel so hurt. I'll get around to forgiving when I feel ready for it. I'll deal with that when I have gotten past this a little bit. And here's the problem with that. It keeps us stuck for too long. And often our feelings actually follow our movement. Sometimes we've got to take a step first, and then our feelings will follow suit. And see, we actually have another option. We have another option than staying stuck. And it's an option that we see modeled in the person of Jesus. And so to look at this, we're actually going to do something a little bit strange. We're going to go a little bit out of order today. A couple weekends from now, we're going to be celebrating Easter, and we're so excited about it. We hope that you'll make plans to join us, to be a part of Easter here at Crosspoint. And, spoiler alert, on that weekend, we're going to be talking about the events of the first Easter. And next weekend, as Kurt mentioned earlier, we're actually going to spend some time leaning into the stories of what came before that first Easter and how they can help us prepare ourselves, position ourselves to be ready for this Easter to be one of the best Easters we've ever had. But today, what we're going to do is we're actually going to jump over that, and we are going to jump ahead to immediately after the story that we talk about on Easter, to what happened after the death and resurrection of Jesus. Now, typically, when we talk about this story, about the story of Easter, we talk about it as good news. And it is. It's the best news. But here's what we miss when we do that, what we can often forget, is that this news, this rumor that Jesus had actually risen from the dead would not have seemed like good news to everyone who first heard it. In fact, if we didn't know how the story ended, we might actually think that the Easter story is the setup for the greatest revenge story of all time. This guy who is unfairly tortured and killed comes back and gets another chance at revenge. Imagine if you were one of the people who actually played a role in killing Jesus. How freaked out would you be when you heard that this dude had come back to life? And imagine Jesus' friends, most of which had dipped as soon as things got hard when Jesus was arrested. Think about Peter, Jesus' closest friend, who denied that he ever knew him, abandoned Jesus in his greatest moment of need. It's easy to imagine that for many of Jesus' followers, this news that he had come back to life would have led them to have some mixed feelings and maybe some fears. Maybe they were worried about what he was going to do next, what he was going to say to them. Perhaps they thought that when they saw him again, it would go something like this.
Do you think he can fly? Shh, here he comes.
Well, all right. Now it's time for me to tell you all what you've done wrong since I last saw you. And don't try and hide because I'm Jesus. I will find you. Let's start with you, Peter. You lied to your mother the other day. Andrew, you said a naughty word when you hit your finger with the hammer. James, you laughed at him when he hit his finger. Moving right along, John, you drank too much wine the other night. Not way too much, just enough to make me angry. Matthew, we fell asleep in church, didn't we? Yes, we did. And Thomas, you were slow dancing a little too close with that girlfriend of yours. Let's see, and you, I forgot your name, so you're off the hook for now. Philip, I saw you smoking a cigarette behind that big rock the other day. Thaddeus, I hate to say I saw you stick up your middle finger at someone who cut you off when you were riding your camel. Benjamin, you aren't wearing your WWJD bracelet. Jacob, I don't mind you saying my name, but not after you stub your toe. And Frank, you know what you did. I just can't repeat it because I'm Jesus. All right, all you sinners, come with me. It's time to pay the piper.
Man, it was only one cigarette.
I heard that.
If you're wondering what just happened, that's kind of the point. This is a joke, by the way. Although, I think maybe some of us actually think these are the kinds of things that Jesus thinks about us, says about us. We sure act like it sometimes. But this is not what actually happened. This is not how it went down when Jesus first came back to be in the same place, to have a conversation with his disciples after the resurrection. And so we're going to look at how this actually went down. And to do that, we're going to look at how John, one of the biographies of Jesus' life, actually describes what happens next. He tells us the disciples were in this room. They were locked up. They were afraid when Jesus entered in. And this is what he says to them. He says, "Peace to you." He shows them his hands and his side as kind of this proof that, hey, this really is me. And the disciples, seeing him with their own eyes, were awestruck. They're amazed. And then Jesus repeated his greeting, "Peace to you." The first words out of his mouth are peace. Don't be afraid. Before they have the opportunity to say anything, to do anything to make it right, what Jesus does is he makes it clear to them, I'm not angry, I'm not disappointed, I've already forgiven you for all of that. See, before Jesus ever went towards the cross, went to his death, he knew exactly what was coming. He knew what his friends would do. He knew the betrayal that was ahead, and still he chose to go forward. He chose to give up his life so that they could experience forgiveness and freedom. And then his first order of business after the resurrection, he invites his friends to come and experience the peace of knowing that they are already forgiven. And really, Jesus is doing the same thing for you and me right now, today. He's coming to those places where we have locked ourselves up in hiding, to the places in your moments of greatest fear and regret, and he's speaking peace over you. He's saying you don't need to be afraid. I'm with you, I'm for you, I'm offering you forgiveness already. Would you take it? And in this moment, he's also modeling for us an important principle, one that I think we can also practice. What Jesus is showing us is that the easiest time to forgive is actually before the offense takes place. If you're in a place today where, as we talk about this circle of blame, you're like, you know what, there's not really a situation at top of mind that I need to deal with right now. I don't really have a relationship where I'm needing to forgive. This is where today gets practical for you. See, you can actually set yourself up for next time to be better by deciding in advance that you are not going to allow someone else's choices to determine the direction of your future. It's not that you won't experience hurt. It's not that there won't be real things that you have to navigate and work through, but you can decide today that, you know what, I'm going to be a person who regularly practices forgiveness. I'm not going to allow someone else to cause me to get tripped up by holding on to resentment. I'm not going to get stuck wasting time trying to get even. What you can decide to do today is to start in small, daily ways, beginning to practice forgiveness. And when you do this, there's this important thing that happens in you. It shapes you. It prepares you to be able to handle the bigger moments that come in a way that you couldn't if you didn't do those works day after day, becoming a person who practices forgiveness. Jesus also had a second priority in this encounter with the disciples. Once they were assured about their own standing, once he knew that they understood his love for them was strong and secure, Jesus starts to talk to them about their mission, about their purpose, about the life that he has invited them to live. John tells us as we keep reading, Jesus says to them, "Hey, just as the Father has sent me, now I am sending you. Receive the Holy Spirit. And if you forgive someone's sins, they're gone for good. But if you don't forgive sins, what are you going to do with them?" Now, what we see here aligns with what we see lots of times throughout Jesus' life. See, pretty much every time Jesus talks about forgiveness, we see him tying together receiving forgiveness and offering it to other people. When he teaches us how to pray, he says every day, spend some time saying, "Forgive us our debts as we also forgive our debtors." Another time, he tells his disciples, "If you forgive others, the Heavenly Father will also forgive you." Or when you are praying, if you are holding a grudge against anyone, first deal with that so that your Father in heaven will forgive your sins too. For Jesus, there is this intimate connection between receiving forgiveness and offering it. We extend forgiveness because we have experienced it. And we can't have one without the other. Now, this is not because God is petty. It's not like God's like, if you don't want to forgive, then I don't want to forgive you. No, what Jesus is, the reason that these are always together for him is he's showing us this is just how it works. If you want to experience the power of forgiveness, then you've got to make sure that it goes both ways. But in this moment, Jesus also recognizes that sometimes, in some situations, we're going to need a power beyond ourselves in order to forgive. And one of the roles that the Holy Spirit plays in our lives is actually empowering us to offer forgiveness when everything within us is screaming to retaliate. This weekend is St. Patrick's Day. Anybody excited about that? I don't know if you care about that, but if you're like me, it's kind of this holiday that sneaks up on us, but my only association really is fun. right? It's the time where we have this like random excuse to throw a party, where we pretend like we're Irish, even if we're not, where we drink green beer or eat Lucky Charms. By the way, if you have not tried the Lucky Charms S'mores edition, I highly recommend them. I bought them for my family, and then I keep eating them. But you know what? If you've ever looked into the story of St. Patrick, the story of why he came to matter so much to the people in Ireland, you may actually be surprised what you find. First of all, you may be surprised to learn that St. Patrick actually wasn't Irish. He was English, and he first came to Ireland when these Irish people came and ransacked his hometown, captured him, and took him back to Ireland as a slave. For 6 years, he lived in these miserable circumstances, literally among pigs, enslaved, before he was able to escape and return home to freedom. And yet once he was back home, he couldn't shake this feeling of being compelled to go back there. And everyone in his life was trying to convince him otherwise. And yet eventually he decided he was going to go against their counselor. And when he got there, all of the people in Ireland were worried about what his intentions were. They were pretty sure that he was there to come and take his revenge. But instead, what we see him doing is exactly what we see Jesus doing in this story that we're looking at today. He offered forgiveness to them that they hadn't even asked for. And he made it his mission to help the people of Ireland see and understand that there is a God who loves them unconditionally, and that God is offering them freedom and forgiveness that's available to them. And the fact that he went back actually changed the entire course of that country's history. It's why this holiday is still celebrated today. Because this guy embodied and demonstrated the power of that question that Jesus asked. If you don't forgive sins, what are you going to do with them? Now, wherever you are with faith, even if you're not ready to buy all of this, there's something so practical in this question. It reveals in us this tendency to be drawn toward revenge instead of forgiveness. It exposes something in us. When we are hurt, we want the people who are responsible to get what they deserve, don't we? Even though we know, even in the best attempts at revenge, even when we've done it exactly right, what we find on the other side is that we're a little bit emptier, that it didn't offer what we thought it was going to. It doesn't fix the pain that the person caused. It doesn't make us feel better in any lasting way. Jesus knows this, and he shows us there is another way, a way that actually leads toward healing and a better future, the way of forgiveness. The answer to that question, if you don't forgive sins, what are you going to do with them, is this: you're going to carry the weight of the hurt with you. The only thing that revenge does is it makes us pay twice. First, when the person hurt us, and second, when we compromise who we want to be in our attempt to make them suffer. But forgiveness, on the other hand, forgiveness allows us to leverage the lessons of the past without lugging around the baggage of the past. Because releasing others actually releases you. One way to think about this: when we forgive, we set a prisoner free. And then we discover that the prisoner we set free is us. Another quote similar that I love: forgiveness is actually God's provision for the hurting heart to be able to heal. This one comes from a book called Forgiving What You Can't Forget. And I love how in this book, the author walks us through her journey of uncovering this long-term hidden addiction and infidelity that just absolutely wrecked her marriage. And as she does this, she describes really practically how forgiveness is both a decision and a process. Forgiveness is both. It's a decision and then it's a process. And so today, as you think about your next move, maybe right now, it's time for you to make a decision. It's time for you to decide to release it, to claim agency over your own life, to decide, you know what, I am no longer going to carry the weight of that with me. I'm going to stop dragging that trash bag along with me, and I'm going to make a decision today to radically forgive, to let that person off the hook. This doesn't necessarily mean that your feelings are going to change in an instant. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be more work to do. But here's what I believe. Here's what I know. If you decide to do this, God will honor that decision. And somewhere down the road, in time, you'll come to realize, you'll come to this place where the past is a reminder, but it is no longer in the driver's seat. Someday, you will become one of those people who other people say, wow, I never would have imagined that you'd been through that. And what you'll be left with are some powerful lessons learned because you made the decision today to forgive. Or maybe today, for you, it's time to commit or to re-engage in the process of forgiveness. Maybe as you think about your life, you're like, you know what, there's a past hurt that I've actually already decided to forgive, but I'm realizing as we're talking about this that it is still coming up more than I want it to. It is still influencing me more in the present and impacting my future more than I was willing to admit before. Maybe this is because you haven't finished the process of dealing with it. And if this is where you are, here is the homework that I want to invite you to try this week. The one thing that I want to ask you to try if you've never done this before is make a list. Make a list of what they owe you, of all of the ways that you've been impacted. See, that first step, when you made a decision to forgive, that's when you forgave the big decision, the main hurt. And that's huge. That matters. You can trust that that matters. But we also have to deal with all of the other ripple effects, all of the ways that that decision has affected you. And so this is where this list comes in. Make a list of everything that they've done. Everything that they've impacted you, everything that you've lost. And it may sound a little bit like this. You may start to write down things like, you know what, when they made that decision, they took away the vision of what I thought my future would look like. They took away my connection to those people. They took away my childhood. They took away my self-esteem. They took away my ability to be transparent or to be trusting. They took away that job that I loved. They took away so much from my kids. Whatever it is, you've got to write it all down, list it out. And as you do this, here's one thing that you're going to find. That list will be longer than what you expect. And as you make your list, what you may find is that some of the energy, some of the angst that you are still feeling about that situation begins to dissipate. As you look over that list, you may find something powerful happening inside of you. You may find as you look at that list that you'll realize, you know, there's nothing that they could really do to actually make it up to you. There's nothing that they could really do to make it right, to pay back what they owe you. Whatever it is that you've been waiting for, thinking once they do this, once they say this, once they admit this, then I'll move past it, you'll realize that that day is not worth waiting for. It may never come. But today, you actually can decide to go first so that you can go on, to release the past so that the past can release you, to step forward into something new. A next time that really is better than the last time. I want to invite you to go ahead and stand with us. The band is going to lead us in one more song to wrap all of this up. And here's what I hope you experience as we sing these words. I hope that whatever start over you are facing today, whatever situation you have been grappling with as we talk through this, no matter how difficult it might be, for you to imagine a way forward in that situation, no matter how impossible it might seem that a better future could actually be possible. In these next few moments, would you dare to release all of that and give trusting God a try? Let's sing this together.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Take a moment to follow our podcast on your preferred platform, and be sure to download our app to stay informed on everything happening here at Crosspoint. And if you like what you heard today, don't hesitate to share it with a friend that might need to hear it too.